How's everybody doing? Hope you're having a fantastic day. It is Thursday, October 9th, and today is the feast day of St. John Henry Newman. But today we have a special one for you tonight. Usually I stream Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, but tonight I'm streaming on a Thursday. And the reason that I'm streaming tonight, you probably are well aware that Pope Leo released his first apostolic exhortation today, the Lexite. And this apostolic exhortation, it's on the issue of the poor. There's a lot of very interesting stuff in there. What I want to do is I want to kind of give you the biggest takeaways, give you the most important things that we need to consider, the most important modern errors that this document treats, because as we know, and as I've emphasized on the show again and again, and as Leo himself emphasized in this document, when it comes to the gospel has social ramifications. The gospel is not merely a private affair. The gospel has political ramifications. It has economic ramifications. The way you think about economics, the way in which you think about politics, the way in which you think about the entire sphere of the social life is something which ought to come from the gospel of Christ. And in connection with this, because the church speaks authoritatively on issues related to the gospel, and because the politics and the economy, in many cases, touch matters of ethics, matters of morals, the church has authority in this area. So for all of the Catholics that you've seen today decry a lot of the teachings of the Lexite, a lot of the ones who you've seen mock many of the ideas in this document, they have to think about whether the church is authoritative in this matter or not. But the church is very clear. There are certain issues, of course, that the church speaks on that are contingent, certain issues that the church speaks on where she does not mean to have this enter into the scope of her authority. She does not mean to bind the consciences of the faithful. But there are certain central principles, certain axioms of political thought that the church does speak authoritatively on. And if you deny the teachings of the church on these issues that are binding, you're in sin. You're not giving the religious obedience that is due to the teaching authority of Christ's vicar, the teaching authority of your bishops in union with Christ's vicar when such a document is released. So this isn't just a secondary issue. We can't hear something like, oh, there's a document on the poor, really another document on the poor. I guess I will just, ignore it and move on and kind of think in whatever ways I feel, whatever ways my favorite political commentator thinks about this, whatever ways my favorite politician may think about this. That's not what you can do in matters of politics, matters of economics. Rather, what you have to do is you have to look through the perennial teachings of the church, which are present in the great encyclicals of the Roman pontiffs. There are many documents of ecumenical councils. There are many addresses called allocutions. There are many exhortations. There are many sermons. And ultimately, this is contained in a compendium form in the Compendium of Social Doctrine, which is released by the Vatican. This is basically a catechism on political issues, and also the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which is a compendium of the church's teaching, which also includes social issues. So when we read the Lexite, I'm so used to saying the Lexite Nos, which is from Pope Francis, but the Lexite, when you read that document, you have to think how this is going to practically form your conscience as a Catholic, both personally, obviously there are personal aspects to interacting with the poor, but also socially, when it comes to political aspects of relating to the poor. So it's a very good document for all of us who may be interested in speculative theological matters. We have to recognize there's something that's actually said in the document by Pope Leo. He quotes a certain document from the church from 1984 under the CDF, under Ratzinger, where it quoted, the CDF document was basically meant to condemn heretical Marxist forms of liberation theology. It completely condemns these as materialistic, as against the gospel, as not putting forward that true solidarity that ought to be through the classes. But it says something very interesting. It actually says that when it comes to our social action, when it comes to our work amongst the poor, this is something that is driven by theological considerations. And when you read the document, I think that's something that shines forth very clearly. There are a lot of people that wanted to accuse this document of being Marxist. There are a lot of people who wanted to accuse this document as basically just being humanitarian. But what you see when you actually read the document is that it is not focused on simply humanitarian issues. It's not focused on simply relieving the material poverty of man. Rather, what this document is focused on is it's focused on completing that integral good of man, which includes even higher than these material goods, includes the spiritual, the intellectual, the cultural goods of men. That is what it's meant to overcome. And it's also based on completely different principles and goals. When we look at why we help somebody who is poor, somebody who is in need, it's ultimately for the love of Christ. It's ultimately for the love of God. And not only that, not is it ultimately for, as an end, the love of God to lead us towards our final end, which is the beatific vision, but it's also something which is rooted in a certain principle, a principle within us, which is supernatural charity, not merely a striving towards not like a bleeding heart liberal who kind of just has empathy for a person, but it's a true supernatural charity to where we want to see that person in heaven with us. We want to see that person united to Christ who we love. So we see throughout the document over and over and over again, Pope Leo condemns, as he has condemned before, giving merely material bread without giving the bread of the word. He condemns over and over and over again, seeing this as merely humanitarian or merely a philanthropic act. That's not why we do it. A different principle. It's rooted in the worship and love of God, and it also ultimately tends towards and produces fruits of the worship and love of God. It's something which comes intimately from contemplation. The considerations that we have on this are considerations of how we can consider our own frailty and poverty, which is due to sin, how we can see Christ in a certain person and contemplate the incarnation. They're very profound ideas which are present in here. And for all of the people out there, all of the talking heads, all of the people who have no idea what they're talking about, when they speak about such matters, when they slander His Holiness, when they slander the document that he has produced in line with his predecessors, when you have people speak like this, you do have to just ask the simple question that Leo asked at the beginning of the document. He says something to the effect that it completely shocks him and leaves him abhorred and appalled that when we speak about such matters, that you have certain people who oppose you. You have certain people who look down upon you. You have certain people who accuse you of somehow being obsessed with this, or accuse you of some sort of pathology on this point, on issues of the poor, on issues of the needy, on issues of the downcast, the disenfranchised, those who have suffered injustices. It says you'll have often people who rise up against you. And he asks a simple question. He says, do they even read the Gospels? And that's a very profound question to ask at this point. When you have somebody who is railing against you for a simple thing like releasing a document on the poor, not only, of course, the poor in their material needs, but the poor in all of their needs. When you have somebody when you have a pope release a document like this, and you have somebody go out and become enraged over this, you really just have to ask simple questions. Where is their heart at? Where is their end? Where is their goal? What are their hierarchy of priorities here? I mean, is this really a heart which is sanctified by the teachings of the gospel? Are these really considerations that come from frequent meditation on the life of Christ, that comes from a life which is attached to the teachings of the Roman pontiffs, going back generations and generations and generations. And really, the answer that you're going to find is completely not. These are very sad people. These are people who their hearts are hardened, their intellects are darkened. And it's unfortunate because they themselves have a certain form of intellectual and spiritual poverty when their hearts are not able to be pierced by simple considerations of the truth, simple considerations of perennial aspects of Catholic theology, overviews of Scripture, practical considerations of the life of Christ, things like this. Their heart cannot be pierced and they cannot be illuminated by this sort of teaching. They cannot put aside all of their ideological problems with Rome or particular acts that His Holiness may be doing here and there. You see a profoundly sad, unfortunate, and impoverished person. And it's a person, as they continually obsess over these various different issues in Rome. As I've said for a while, somebody reached out to me, actually. And I know this is a long intro, but I promise I'll get into the actual document itself. Somebody reached out to me about the comments on Pope Leo commenting the pro-life comments, right, about the death penalty. And they asked me, how do I resolve this? That's what their question was, is how do I resolve this? They were talking about how they were having doubts. They were having difficulties with the Catholic Church as the church established by Jesus Christ. And really, what you have to have going into this in response when you begin to feel those sorts of feelings bubble up within you, when you begin to have those intrusive thoughts of maybe I was wrong, maybe I need to go somewhere else, maybe I should abandon the church, maybe I should abandon the Vicar of Christ, maybe I should abandon my bishop, or maybe I should abandon the teachings of the Roman pontiffs. When you have those thoughts sort of bubble within you, what reason tells you, when you follow the guide of reason, you see, and I think this is a pretty universal view, see, that was a problematic statement. I don't think there's really anybody out there in their right minds who look at that and don't say, from at least a perspective of somebody who wants to be in continuity with the teachings of the church, not only the preconciliar church, but even the teachings of Benedict XVI, St. John Paul II, etc. When you see something like that, it's obviously one must deny. One must look at that and say, that was an incorrect statement. But what reason tells you is that this was a private interview. But what does your emotions say? What do the feelings say to you? What does the flesh creep up and tell you? It tells you that's cope, right? It drags you down and says, no, actually, what you have to do is you just have to be angry about this. You have to be upset about this. You have to let this disturb your peace. Christ has told us that scandals will come. We see even St. Peter scandalizing others throughout the New Testament. We see very dangerous acts, actually. Things which St. Paul was so clear as to say were acts which scandalized people against the very foundation of the gospel. So what were you expecting? When you became a Catholic, what did you think? You think this was going to be easy? You thought that you weren't going to have emotional turmoil? You thought that you didn't have to have that requirement of discipline of the intellect over your passions? You thought you weren't going to have proper dispositions to consider what is true over considering what your emotions are going to lead towards of sensible comfort? Is that what you thought that was going to happen as a Catholic? I think it's a ridiculous notion. But we have to clearly distinguish these matters. We have to be reasonable men. We have to be those who are not led by sloganeering and propaganda that often comes from a lot of these online outlets who every time the Pope does something cringe want to take this as an opportunity to draw you away from the very heart of Christ, the Sacred Heart which poured out so much love for you. You have those people who want to pull you in this direction by playing into your emotions. But you're a man. You're a man, and a man is not led by his emotions. A man's led by his reason. A man's emotions are directed by him. He's not directed by his emotions. So when we look on these matters, when we consider these matters, we have to ask, what does reason tell us? Where does reason lead us? Where do those certain principles which have already been given to us, what does that tell us on these matters? You can't let your peace be disturbed by the scandals that you already knew were going to come. Because if that is enough, if the Pope blessing ICE and saying something abhorrent in an interview, if that's enough to draw you away from the Sacred Heart of Christ, I'm sorry, but you're just in such a dark and bad position right now. And you really need to stick close to the Sacred Heart of Christ. That's what we need to look on to. That's what we need to consider. You can't just constantly be attacked, allow yourself to be attacked by scandal mongers. Just don't let yourself fall into this trap. Let reason guide you. Let understanding guide you. Don't let your passions lead you into making irrational choices, because you understand, and a lot of you realize that fundamentally, when it comes to being scandalized by these statements to such a degree as to fall away from the church, to fall away from Christ, to refuse obedience to the Roman pontiff, this is a fundamentally irrational act. Because we know as Catholics, anybody knows who is well catechized, that not everything the Pope says is binding. And we know that not everything, even that is binding, or that gives requires some sort of obedience of it, that not everything of that category is infallible. So you have to ask yourself, why are you led to despair on this? Why? Is it because reason is guiding you? Because reason abhors this. Reason says that this is not a contradiction. This ought not to lead to this decision. That's what reason tells you. But your emotions, drawn in by people who are propagandizing against the church, people who want nothing more than you to leave the church, are you letting these emotions cloud your judgment? And I think that's what we all need to be clear on. But something like this, something like Dilexi Te, this is something that is important, that is vital, is something that informs your conscience. And you need to carefully consider the teachings of this document. So that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to go in, I'm going to give you, I think, what are the biggest takeaways, the most important takeaways. And then I'll give you a little bit of an overview of the document. I'll give you the chapters, what each one of the chapters, the different things that are spoken about. So if you don't want to read the Apostolic Exhortation, that's fine. If you want to read it, that's awesome. But where I wanted to begin first is I actually wanted to begin with what even an apostolic exhortation is. Because a lot of people, when they announced that this was coming out, they said that, Pope Leo's first encyclical is coming out. A lot of people said that. Leo is having his first encyclical. And really, an encyclical and an apostolic exhortation are actually quite different. An encyclical is basically ordinarily in an ordinary manner, the sort of highest way in which a pope teaches. There's certain extraordinary ways in which he teaches, which are usually in other forms, but ordinarily, your sort of yearly message from the Pope is going to come through an encyclical letter. The frequent writing of encyclicals that usually is traced back to around the time of Pope Leo XIII. But these encyclical letters, they're usually very doctrinally heavy. They're usually meant to be teaching documents, and these are documents which are meant to be read in seminaries. They're meant to be read by bishops. They're meant to be read by priests, educated laymen. These are documents which are really meant to inform the intellect. It's kind of the general reason for writing an encyclical letter. But an apostolic exhortation is actually slightly different. So an apostolic exhortation, the purpose behind an apostolic exhortation is not as much meant to inform the intellect as it is meant to inspire action. Think of it like the difference between an encyclical and apostolic exhortation is like the difference between a lecture and a homily. An encyclical is basically like an extended written lecture, but an apostolic exhortation is basically like an extended written homily. So that's the difference between the two genres. So we're going to have to wait a while for the encyclical, because the encyclical is usually going to be a Pope's first encyclical, is kind of like their Magna Carta. So this is not Pope Leo's Magna Carta. A lot of people are overemphasizing the importance of the Lex Aetate. A lot of people are saying that this was, a foundational document where we are going to see how Pope Leo is going to teach in all of his other teachings. But that's really not the case. That's going to be for his encyclical. Usually a pope will write on a more general topic in his encyclical, first encyclical, and then the rest of his encyclicals actually kind of take the form of basically commentaries, expansions on various different themes, or at least a lot of them, sometimes not all, but a lot of them are going to take the form of expanded commentaries on different themes, which are brought up in the original encyclical. So the Lex Aetate, that is an apostolic exhortation. It is not necessarily an encyclical. And the second thing that I wanted to bring up is I actually wanted to bring up the name of the Lex Aetate. And it's kind of funny. Somebody on Twitter actually pointed this out to me. I didn't even recognize the reference at first. As I read that it was, I have loved you. That's what it meant, Lex Aetate, loved you. And I didn't realize at first that this was from Revelation 3:9. Now, for those of you who may be a little bit for the red-pilled out there, Revelation 3:9 is a very interesting verse, to put in the slightest. I'll read it in its fullness. Quote, "Behold, I will make those of the synagogue of Satan, who show that they are Jews and are not, but lie. Behold, I will make them come and bow down before your feet and learn that I have loved you." So this is kind of like one of the foundational texts in the New Testament about the Jewish people, especially the Jewish people and their relationship to the church after the destruction of Jerusalem and of the temple in 70 AD. This is saying that there is actually a certain promise in salvation history. You have the older brother and you have the younger brother. The older brother throughout the entire history of the Old Testament is in some way unfaithful. You have Cain and Abel. You have Jacob and Esau, right? You have these cases of older and younger brother, Isaac and Ishmael. You have cases of older and younger brothers. They have these disagreements, right? You have the sons of Israel, the sons of Jacob, and you have Joseph, right? You actually have Ephraim and Manasseh, the children of Joseph. It's actually the younger that gets the blessing over and above the older. This is a common theme throughout the entirety of the Old Testament. The difference between the younger brother and the older brother. You have the older brother, by their birthright, they're somehow deserving of the inheritance of the father. But the older brother spurns the birthright. So the older brother may squander it in some sort of way. And then from this, it's actually the younger brother who receives the gifts that were meant for the older brother. So this plays out in salvation history very clearly when we're looking at the relationship between the Jews and the Christians, the Jews and the Gentiles, ultimately. But you have the older brother, yes, of course, beloved for the sake of for their forefathers, and therefore there's a remnant which is preserved of Jews who did not go this way. But what you have is you have the older brother, you have the Jewish people, they spurn the covenant. They break the covenant, they kill the prophets, and ultimately they crucify the Lord of glory, right? They ultimately crucify the Lord, and then they persecute his apostles, and they persecute the nation church. So we have the older brother spurning his birthright by violating the covenant over and over and over again. This is kind of the entire theme of the Old Testament. And then what you have is you have this ultimate rejection and judgment, a temporary rejection, as St. Paul says, but an ultimate rejection and judgment that happens at 70 AD. And then now, he who is not a people are called a people, right? As St. Peter says. So you have the Gentiles. The Gentiles are brought into the fold. The Jews are judged for their iniquity, for their rejection of God, and for their persecution of Christ and of his apostles. That infidelity, they're kicked out, right? But we have this promise right here. And this promise, it's very potent because it kind of brings up actually that brings up that image of the sons of Jacob and Joseph, right? Everybody knows the story. Joseph, he was the beloved of Israel, and his brothers were jealous. He had the coat, right? And they threw him in the pit, and they were going to kill him. The older brother, I think it was Reuben, steps up for him and says, what we need to do is we need to sell him to the Arab traders, the Ishmaelite traders, who are going to take him to Egypt eventually. So Joseph gets taken away. The brothers, the father, Jacob, thinks that he's dead. And he has this dream that really pissed them off. And the dream was that Jacob and all the brothers are going to bow down before him. All we see is he gets brought into Egypt, right? And he rises to prominence, falls, and then rises to prominence again. And eventually there's a famine. They go, right? But what happens at the end of the story is actually very interesting. What happens at the end of the story is actually a fulfillment of that original dream. Through all this trial, through the persecution of Joseph, we eventually see is that the older brothers actually do bow down to Joseph. They go and they bow down before him. And we see in salvation history, the same thing has been promised to the Gentiles. The same thing has been promised to the church. We see throughout the entire history of the church, we see a persecution by the world. Of course, we can point more immediately to the synagogue of Satan, in all of the various different forms. We see a persecution of the church. We see a persecution of the people of God in all of its various different iterations. But we see right here, it says, I will make those of the synagogue of Satan who say that they are Jews and are not, but lie. Behold, I will make them come and bow down before your feet and learn that I have loved you. What they will think is you have, and this is especially potent when you're considering the Jews. The Jews, they have this idea that they are special, that they are unique. They have this idea that they are greater and above the Gentiles. They have this sort of ethnic narcissism that often comes about with being Jewish. This is very baked into their religion. But what you see is that actually in the last days, and this is a great promise. This is a great promise that we see from Romans 11. We see that their casting off is temporary because they will eventually be saved. They will eventually all come back and all Israel will be saved. What we see is we have this period of hatred, this period of despising, this period of rejection. And what we see is that eventually they turn around, they come back, and they see that actually, no, they have the, we see like the parable of the Good Samaritan, not the Good Samaritan, the parable of the prodigal son. See, just like in the parable of the prodigal son, we have the Gentiles, they go and they're eating the slop of the pig. They're rejecting, what they know about God from nature. They're falling into idolatry. But they actually do come back at the preaching of the gospel. They do come back and they're accepted into the house. And God celebrates because of the bringing of the Gentiles into his covenant people. But we see the older brother is mad. He's angry. He's vengeful. But eventually what we do see is we see that there is this recognition. There is this recognition that will eventually happen to where the Jews, they will recognize that the Gentiles are beloved. They will recognize that we are united to the people of God, and they will bow down before us, and they will learn that God has loved us. And there will be a time in which they are received back into the love of God as well. That's promised in Romans 11, as I said, that one day they will come back and all Israel will be saved. Now, why do I say all this? This is very important for understanding salvation history, and I think it's a very interesting conversation to have. But ultimately, why this is very interesting is because there's a certain way in which this is appropriated by His Holiness and has been appropriated in the tradition as a text specifically about the poor. The text of the Good Samaritan, by the way, which is another text which is essentially brought about the poor. This is ultimately about it's about who your neighbor is, but it's ultimately meant to be something about how there is a despising of the poor, the one who is received and healed by the Jewish elite at the time. But what we really see is that this is appropriated for the poor for a very important reason. Well, it's because you have the great in the world, you have the mighty in the world, you have the powerful in the world. And yes, we can see the microcosm of this in first century Israel during the time of Christ and the apostles. You see this on a wider plane as well. You have the rich, the powerful, the well-regarded, and these individuals, they believe that they have a special and unique, that God specially and uniquely loves them because of their temporal and earthly success. But actually, that's not the case. Actually, there's a certain unique love that is had, a unique preference, actually, that is had for God, by God, for the poor. There's certain unique love of the poor, and Leo, he goes throughout all the texts in sacred scripture that talk about this. There's a unique love for the humble, for the lowly, for the despised, for those who are not accepted within normal society, those who are suffering injustices of various kinds, those who have certain types of poverty, whether they're material poverty or the various other different forms of poverty. There's a certain unique love that God has for these people, kind of like a unique love that a mother has for her sick child. So we have this image of the older brother, the younger brother, the bringing of the Gentiles into the church, the bowing down of the Jews before the Gentiles, and the recognition that God actually loves us. There's that whole kind of narrative that's going on, and really it's being appropriated for the sake of understanding the relationship between the rich, the mighty, and the powerful, and then the humble and the meek. And of course, the humblest and meekest among us besides our Lord is Our Lady, as we see from the Magnificat. So we see this appropriated image that the rich and the powerful, contrary to how it is now, where you have the bowing down of the poor and the marginalized and the oppressed before the rich, in the future, you're going to have the bowing down of the rich and the powerful to the marginalized, kind of like we see in the parable of the rich man and of Lazarus. Is that now the rich man has received good things in this life, and the poor man lays at his gates. He's sick, he's infirm, and the rich man doesn't care about the man laying at his gates at all. But the exact reverse happens in the afterlife, where the rich man is in hell begging, just pleading for the poor man to be able to even take a drop of water and to place it on his tongue to quench the unquenchable fire. And this is an image that we see being appropriated here, is that actually when it comes to the relationship between the rich and the poor, that's reversed, right? There's a reversal that goes on. So this shows God's unique love, God's heart for those who are poor in all of the different forms, which we're going to talk about the multifaceted approach to poverty. There's a lot of you, when you think of poor, you're just thinking about people who don't have money. That's not really the case. So the unique love that God has for the poor, and a unique love in which we ought to imitate, obviously, God, to be perfect as our Heavenly Father is perfect, and the unique love that we ought to have for the poor, a love for the poor and the despised that ought to color all of our interactions with them. So that's like on the name itself. And there's a lot of implications that could be drawn about that. There's a lot of commentary that could be made on the name in particular. But the second important point that I wanted to bring up, and this is something that I've mentioned a few times already, is the multifaceted nature of poverty. Because what you will have with the Marxists, the materialists, the socialists, the American liberals, American conservatives as well, is when they think of poverty, we always think of the absence of material goods. So you have somebody, they don't have money, they don't have a house, they don't have clothing. And this is sort of the primary locus of poverty in which we think of. You have countries that are poor. Why are they poor? Well, they're poor because they don't have money. That's the thoughts that we always go to. But that's not actually the worst form of poverty. It's not actually the most profound form of poverty. It's not actually the most dangerous form of poverty. What His Holiness says, and he has said it on a number of different occasions, is that actually the worst form of poverty is spiritual poverty. It's intellectual poverty. It's cultural poverty. Just like material poverty is the absence of material goods, so intellectual poverty is the absence of intellectual goods, lack of education, lack of native intellectual abilities. You have spiritual poverty, which is a lack of spiritual goods. You have cultural poverty, which is a lack of cultural goods, which not going to draw out the implications of that one, but draw them out yourself. So when it comes to poverty, poverty is multifaceted and it comes in a number of different expressions, and not all of them are like the other. So you may have, for example, missions. Think about missions. Missions, we go and we send evangelists, we send missionaries to other countries in order to bring the gospel to them. What are we trying to alleviate there? We're trying to alleviate spiritual poverty. And that in those who are in spiritual poverty and in darkness, there's a special place of love that God has in his heart for these people to want to bring them into his fold. Those who have cultural poverty, developmental poverty, intellectual poverty, the various different ways in which we go and we resolve moral poverty is another one that he brings up often. We want to go and we want to resolve these situations, right? We want to bring these goods where they are lacking. And the bringing of goods where these are lacking is called an integral good. Because when you think about solving poverty, we're kind of like, okay, well, we have a broke guy down the street, and he makes 10,000 less than what he needs. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to just give him $10,000 every year, and then poverty's fixed. And therefore, we're going to save world poverty. That's not actually how it happens. This is something very interesting in the document, which distinguishes us from a lot of contemporary liberal and some conservative politics, and especially Marxist versions, is that Catholics, we think of welfare as a sort of bandage on a temporary problem. You have an individual and they will starve, die, be homeless, whatever. So giving them material support like that is a temporary fix on this. But Catholicism completely denies and abhors the idea of the welfare state, where you have a dependence on the state for material goods that is systematic, that is universal. Pope Leo multiple times this document speaks out against the welfare state. But rather, when it comes to this integral development of integral good that is mentioned here, what we're really trying to remove is what are called structures of sin. So there are these systematic injustices present in society to where people are lacking the type of opportunities or the circumstances in order to fully develop their goods, right? In order to fully develop spiritually, morally, politically, culturally, intellectually, in all of the various different forms. And what we want to do is we want to remove these structures of sin. So, for example, this will be a fun one. You have a great degree of moral poverty that is in the United States of America from pornography. Pornography is something that brings about moral degradation within in American culture, the ways in which women and men interact, the type of vices in which they indulge in. There's a great degree of moral poverty which is present. So one of the structures of sin that must be removed in order to bring about a fully just society, in order to remove this occasion for moral darkness and to free and liberate people from moral slavery, to illuminate them and to dispose them towards a greater openness to the gospel, would be through removing the structure politically. Now, a lot of people, they're very scared of that. They think that's a dirty word. Remove it politically. This is exactly what Leo is calling people to here, is you have these structures of sin which lead to various different forms of injustice, which leads to various different forms of poverty, not only material, but all of other forms as well. And what needs to be removed are these structures of sin. How is this not called for political action and a certain creative political action as well? To think about what are the causes of these social ills, what are the causes of these social vices, and what are the causes of these different forms of poverty, and how are they removed? That's what's being thought of. So there's the idea of the multifaceted nature of poverty, the idea of the solution of an integral development. And there's the idea of this integral development being against these structures of sin. And the worst form of this poverty, by the way, being spiritual poverty, by the way. So this is a section that I wanted to read. He said, quote, "At the same time, we should perhaps speak more correctly of the many faces of the poor and of poverty, since it is a multifaceted phenomenon. In fact, there are many forms of poverty: the poverty of those who lack material means of subsistence, the poverty of those who are socially marginalized and lack the means to give voice to their dignity and abilities, moral and spiritual poverty, cultural poverty, and the poverty of those who find themselves in a condition of personal or social weakness or fragility, the poverty of those who have no rights, no space, no freedom. End quote. So the solution to this multifaceted approach is going to be something which is integral. An integral good means all of the parts coming together. You can't merely solve, like, okay, I guess I kind of have to put in these terms, whatever. If you don't like it, if you're offended, I don't care. When you have a black community, yeah, you guys knew I was going to start with that, okay? When you have a black community, let's be honest, we know that the poverty there is multifaceted, right? There are intellectual problems. There's intellectual poverty. There's cultural poverty. Let me go through the list. Material poverty, moral poverty, spiritual poverty, cultural poverty. There's all of the different forms of poverty. If you just give these people money, it's destructive. What do you need to do? Well, these people, they need the Catholic faith. They need to have certain forms of injustice removed, insofar as that is in effect, right? Moral, spiritual poverty, that needs to be removed. You need to have the intellectual poverty be removed. You have the cultural poverty be removed. This is going to take a multifaceted approach. It's not just enough to throw money at black people and assume that black people are all of a sudden going to build Wakanda in Baltimore City, right? That's stupid. That's idiotic. You're not going to have Wakanda in Chicago. That's not happening. What you need is you actually need a multifaceted approach that removes these structures of sin, right? And these structures of sin are not just, the white man's mean to me. That's not the structures of sin that are present, right? It's not police brutality. That's not the structures of sin that are present. If there was, if police stopped being mean to black people, it's not like they would all of a sudden found the Black Harvard in Baltimore. That's not going to happen, right? So we see that there's a multifaceted problem that's going on with this form of poverty that deeply touches Americans, because these are fellow Americans that their poverty needs to be eliminated. And out of charity and out of love for them, we need to realize that this is a task which needs to be done. But it's not merely through fixing material needs, right? It's not merely through getting them jobs. It's not merely through only giving them vocational training, or at least making these things available. There rather needs to be a shift, a political and social shift towards removing all of the different causes to these different issues. So we have this, we have interesting comments which are made on social development, spiritual assistance, welfare. I want to go through each one of them individually, not in a lot of detail because I've been yapping a long time and we're almost at 45 minutes already. On social development, he says, quote, "At times, Christian movements or groups have arisen which show little to no interest in the common good of society, and in particular, the protection and advancement of its most vulnerable and disadvantaged members. Yet we must never forget that religion, especially the Christian religion, cannot be limited to the private sphere, as if believers had no business making their voice heard with regard to the problems affecting civil society and the issues concerned to its members." End quote. So he brings in this over and over and over again, that this is actually somewhat of there's a political solution to this. Politics, Leo, he's already used this definition a lot. Politics is in a way the highest form of charity, because the common good is more noble than the good of the individuals, because the good of the individuals in a way terminates and is fulfilled in a higher way in the common good, right? So to facilitate the common good, and in virtue of this, to facilitate the good of those who are the members of the society to whom the common good is of, this is a form of charity. And therefore, yes, it is the business of Catholics to be involved in this. And yes, the church is authoritative in this. We need to obey and listen to the church. And we need to I already said obey, but be obedient and be conscious of the directions that the church gives us, right? This is something which is motivated by supernatural charity. This is something which conforms us to Christ. This is something which is essential to the calling of the gospel. And then he also brings up the point of spiritual assistance, because the worst form of poverty, when you go down to Baltimore City, and I only say that because I grew up in Maryland, Western Maryland, though. If you count Carroll County as Western Maryland, Maryland people understand. But I grew up in Western Maryland, so Baltimore City is the most proximate example that I have. If you go to Baltimore City, the greatest poverty of the disadvantaged and disenfranchised people there isn't the poverty that they have materially, isn't the poverty that they even have culturally or morally. Ultimately, the worst form of poverty, and the poverty which in many ways reverses the other ones, is the spiritual poverty. The spiritual poverty is the worst. And this is what makes us completely and utterly diametrically opposed, as far as black is from white, as far as the East is from the West, from Marxist notions on this matter. Because the liberation that we offer is not merely a material liberation. It's not merely a liberation from temporal oppressors. It's not merely any removal of all of these injustices for their own sake. We don't merely consider things in material terms. We do consider things in terms of the spiritual being higher. The material obviously matters, but the spiritual is higher. That is the highest end. The worst and most profound poverty is the spiritual one. So he says, quote, "Nor is it a question merely of providing for welfare assistance and working to ensure social justice. Christians should also be aware of another form of inconsistency in the way that they treat the poor. In reality, the worst discrimination which the poor suffer is the lack of spiritual care. Our preferential option for the poor must mainly translate into a privileged and preferential religious care." End quote. And then another thing, another instance that he brings up is, and I mentioned the issue of welfare being brought up over and over again, but really part of the integral development for a lot of these people is get a job. I'm sorry to phrase it like this, but get a job, where is possible, get a job. That's real. That's in much kinder way than that. That's what Leo says. Leo says, well, how do we fix this? They got to get jobs. Like that's the way that we fix this. We make it economically possible in the places that it's possible. You don't just dump money on these people. You build in, for example, a lot of the very poor countries, you build an economy that actually works out and people can get jobs. I don't know how that looks. I don't know how colonial pilled that looks. With some of these countries, probably pretty colonial pilled, but, obviously, we don't want to exploit these people for their resources. That's ridiculous. Exploit these people. What we want economies that are thriving and functioning, and people are able to just get jobs. Dumping money into Africa never works, right? So he says, quote, "I would like to close by saying something." Oh, wait, no, this is about almsgiving. Oh, no. I would like to close by saying something about almsgiving, which nowadays is not looked upon favorably even among believers. Not only is it rarely practiced, but it is even at times disparaged. Let me state once again that the most important way to help the disadvantaged is to assist them in finding a good job. So true. So that they can lead a more dignified life by developing their abilities and contributing their fair share. In this sense, lack of work means far more than simply not having a steady source of income. Work is also this, but it is much more, much more. By working, we become a fuller person. Our humanity flourishes. Young people become adults only by working. Yeah, get jobs, guys, by the way. The church's social doctrine has always seen human work as a participation in God's work of creation that continues every day, also thanks to the hands, mind, and heart of the worker. On the other hand, where this is not possible, so obviously we know that there's situations where this is not possible, we cannot risk abandoning others to the fate of lacking the necessities for a dignified life. Consequently, almsgiving remains for the time being a necessary means of contact, encounter, and empathy with those that are less fortunate. This is kind of the interplay right there between, on the one hand, welfare and almsgiving. Welfare is, in a sense, the perpetual welfare is a very bad thing. The systematic reliance on the state is a very bad thing, but it's a temporary bandage. In a well-functioning Catholic society, in a well-functioning society with good Catholics who are rich and care for the poor, right? It's obviously not a bad thing to be rich, but who are rich and who care for the poor, you don't need welfare. You have almsgiving. And the almsgiving, unlike welfare, which is not a personal act of charity which remits sins, as Scripture always talks about, almsgiving remitting your sins. Unlike I just said it. Unlike welfare, almsgiving is somewhat redemptive. It redeems your soul. It blots out and eliminates sin. You have your sins like this. Almsgiving drags it down. shuts it out, gets rid of it, burns it away. That's why almsgiving is so important. This was one of the most awesome parts of the document, which I'm going to get into in a minute, was the final exhortation on almsgiving. He says, prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. Those are the three things. Prayer, a lot of people focus on this, right? Fasting, a little bit. Some people focus on it. A lot of people don't. Almsgiving, almost completely dead, right? Not many people have actually an idea of what almsgiving is and the purpose of almsgiving and why we do almsgiving, how it differs from merely like donating to a charity or whatever. What almsgiving is as an encounter with an individual person who is suffering and in need. It's very distinct from the kind of contemporary notion of, giving donations to a charity or anything like that. But that's why the last section, if you read any part of this document, read the last section on almsgiving. And then the third point that's very important that he brings up is that when it comes to our work amongst the poor, it's not something which is merely a humanitarian act. It's actually somewhat of a spiritual act, which causes us to differ greatly from the Marxists on how we consider this. So he says, quote, "For this reason, works of mercy are recommended as a sign of the authenticity of worship, which, while giving praise to God, has the task of opening us up to the transformation that the Spirit can bring about in us, so that we may all become an image of Christ and his mercy towards the weakest. In this sense, our relationship with the Lord, expressed in worship, also aims to free us from the risk of living our relationships according to the logic of calculation and self-interest. We are instead open to the gratuitousness that surrounds those who love one another and therefore share everything in common." End quote. So this idea that actually when it comes to these acts of almsgiving and acts of love of neighbor, they not only are sort of expressive, well, they're not only signs that one loves God, but it's actually a true and proper expression and, in a way, a fulfillment of one's love for God, which is always, that which is the first and the greatest commandment. And he continues again. He says, quote, "This Christocentric and deeply ecclesial perspective leads us to affirm that offerings, when born of love, not only alleviate the needs of one's brother or sister, but also purify the heart of the giver, if he or she is willing to change. Indeed, in the words of St. Augustine, almsgiving can be beneficial to you in erasing past sins if you have amended your ways. It is, so to speak, the ordinary path to conversion for those who wish to follow Christ with an undivided heart." Notice this right here. It's the ordinary path of conversion. It's like the first step sort of path of conversion, which is so crazy that the detachment from material goods, the sacrifice of almsgiving for the poor who are so loved by God, that this, far from being, commonly spoken of the ordinary way, this is usually seen as sort of an extraordinary activity that is not really something which is commonly done. It's usually only spoken of. Maybe we'll talk about it during Lent. Like somebody will bring up almsgiving, and it's kind of just like give more money to your parish. That's the sort of idea of almsgiving. But almsgiving needs to enter back into the central paradigm of the Christian life. And I really hope that last section in the exhortation really digs into this. So he continues, and this is kind of the last point that I wanted to bring up, almost at a little past 50 minutes. I still need to summarize the document, and then I'll take questions. But the last is, he actually explains what is meant by the encountering of the poor being an encounter with Christ, or the idea of the poor as our teachers. Because this gets thrown around a lot in the magisterium. I don't know about you, but there's sort of these vague statements of, the poor are our teachers, we're encountering Christ in the poor. Like, it seemed like platitudes. It seems like just a statement that is made. It doesn't really have, a very deep meaning to it. But actually, the way that Leo explains this is just so awesome. It's so amazing. And it really, I think, is one of the best succinct explanations of actually what this concept means in the first place. So he says, quote, "In light of this, it is evident that all of us must let ourselves be evangelized by the poor and acknowledge the mysterious wisdom which God wishes to share with us through them. Growing up in precarious circumstances, learning to survive the most adverse conditions, trusting in God with the assurance that no one else takes them seriously, and helping one another in the darkest moments, the poor have learned many things they have hidden in their hearts. Those of us who have not had similar experiences of living this way certainly have much to gain from the source of wisdom, that is, the experience of the poor. Only by relating our complaints to their sufferings and privations can we experience a reproof that can challenge us to simplify our lives. So what does this mean? What is he getting at? Basically, what he is getting at is that when it comes to the sort of poverty, the material poverty, the temporal poverty that the poor have, when it comes to their lack of resources, the trust that they have to have in God, the prayers that they have to send forth to God, the difficulties and sufferings that they have to suffer through. When it comes to all of these different things, this actually reveals to us something about the human condition spiritually, is that in many ways we are Christ, he willed to become poor so that we may become rich. There is that poverty that the human condition has in the fall from our first parents, in the actual sins that we have committed, in the sort of unfulfilled. There's not that final fulfillment of the complete resurrection of our bodies, that groaning that all of creation has, that poverty that we have that leaves us at a point which is infinitely less than the riches that we will find, in beatitude. So when we contemplate the poor, when we look at the poor, we see how we need to trust in God. We see how we need to repent of our sins. We see how we ought not to have an anxiety for the present life, for the present world. We see and are encouraged to detachment from material things. So in this way, the contemplation of the poor, yes, obviously we contemplate Christ in the poor because Christ, was poor in a literal and material sense. But in another way, we're contemplating all of these other spiritual realities. And this gets beautifully brought out throughout the entire apostolic exhortation. I said that I'd go through the outline, but I'm almost at an hour. I'm really sleepy right now, and I kind of just want to answer questions. So, oh gosh, I got a lot of super chats to go through. Dude, what the world? There's everyone's becoming members, so I have 60. Okay, let me skip through all of them. 60. Okay, skip. We're going to impose love and charity for the poor with an iron fist. So true. This is the dream. This is the dream right now. We're going to impose the love and charity. We're going to crush the structures of sin. We're going to crush the structures of sin with an iron fist. It's so true. Pope Leo is the greatest rage baiter. He single-handedly outed everyone who was bad faith actors by putting certain keywords in. This is actually real. Have you seen? This is so funny. Have you seen some of the reactions to? The healthy secularism thing was so funny because I saw a bunch of people fall for it. All the same people fell for it. But then people were falling for it for this one too. You saw all the people just blatantly lying about the Pope. They were just blatantly saying, "Oh, this is a Marxist document." Oh, this is just simply an empty humanitarianism and an indifferentism to matters of spiritual. This is putting the material over the spiritual. And you read the document, he says 50 times. He opposes these. It's literally every single paragraph. He's saying things against these. But yeah, pay attention, guys. Pay attention to who either are they dummies? Are they bad faith actors? That's the question you have to ask yourselves. Do they have intellectual poverty that we need to enrich, right? Do they have the intellectual poverty that must be enriched, by learning how to read so we're able to allow them to read? Or maybe we're going to go to their houses and read this to them. Maybe we'll make an audiobook of some sort so they can read through it. But who is lacking the intellectual riches versus who is lacking the moral riches, okay? Who is dishonest, who's a bad faith actor versus who is just kind of gullible, not so smart, etc. Thank you for your positive coverage of Pope Leo. It has been deeply edifying for me. Also, do you know when we can how we can write letters to His Holiness? No, I do not. I'm not aware of how that works. Thank you, Dylan.
It's 9 o'clock.
Okay, this is not really about pores. St. Thomas and Aristotle talk about friendship between the sexes as a virtue, but St. Alphonsus seems total avoidance. How do they work together? I have a lot of female friends. Should I abandon them? Uh, thinking on how I should answer this. Because there's kind of like a both and principle here. There's a frequent denial in the tradition of what is called familiarity between the sexes. So a sort of how would I put this in modern, like a chumminess might be the best word. Like the type of friendship you have with your male friends, a sort of chumminess. There's a sort of proximity that comes with this. There's a sort of there's a closeness, proximity, closeness are obviously synonyms. You're doing a lot of things together, like that in private. A lot of times, you're sharing a lot of details about one's interior life. That's a familiarity, and that familiarity is what Saint Alphonsus and the fathers and Saint Thomas himself. Saint Thomas, he did not affirm that people should have familiarity between the sexes. That's a sort of intimate closeness that a lot of the saints spoke against as being very dangerous. But friendship, there's also like a different notion of friendship that I think would be appropriate. There's sort of a sharing friendship. It comes from a sharing of goods and a unity of end. And a sharing of goods and a unity of end does not necessarily mean that one has to have that intimacy that would be reserved for one's male friends. So that's the distinction that I would make. Looking sharp. Keep up the good work. Thank you. Okay. Is there any other chats I want to answer? Yeah, imitation of Christ. Should we not be familiar with the opposite sex? Yes. Familiarity, this is spoken of a lot. Like this is very frequently covered. So any counter examples that get brought up, I hate this. Every time I talk about familiarity between the sexes, I always get the people who be like, "Oh, but what about these two saints who are of the opposite sex and they were like friends?" And it's really kind of missing the entire point of what familiarity is. Because there's like a certain I guess the best way of putting it, there's a certain emotional affinity that one has with their friends and a certain emotional intimacy that one has with their friends to where, for your average heterosexual man, that's not going to be something that is going to be an occasion of either sin in yourself or scandal in others. But when it comes to the presence of concupiscence within us, that is always present until our dying breath. For that sort of closeness and intimacy and familiarity between a male and a female, that's just completely inappropriate. And I'm telling you guys, you're playing with fire. Okay, the sacred page explicitly speaks against this sort of intimacy and familiarity with women. This is not only the church fathers, not only the medievals or anything like that. It's also sacred scripture. Read Sirach, and Sirach is not just merely talking about loose women or talking about places that you might be tempted or anything like that. No, it's talking about all women. It's talking about all of them. So, and obviously, I'm excluding family members before you decide to throw your brain away before you respond. But no, stay away from women. Stay away. It just do not have that level of intimacy and familiarity. That's just it's not. It doesn't end well. And even if you don't commit a sin against the sixth and ninth commandment in an external act, you don't have intercourse with this person or commit those secondary acts which are ordered towards intercourse. Even if you don't have those sort of commit acts which are committed, there's still like an inappropriate emotional attachment that you have to this person. There's an inappropriate emotional attachment that you have to a person of the opposite sex, wherein you delight in the friendship with this person because of the ways in which concupiscence always encapsulates our heart. It is in a certain way always going to be sensible. So unless you guard your heart and stay away from familiarity, you can obviously have friendships like I mentioned before, a certain sharing in goods which are ordered to a common end. Like that's completely fine. But to have that sort of intimacy with that person, to reveal your interior life to them, like that's calling for really bad news, and that's not in line with the ways in which the Saints acted. So yeah, stay away from women. Thoughts on Pope Leo going to Turkey for his first international trip? I don't have any thoughts on that. I think it's for the Nicaea 2025, right? Please read the question I asked a little above. I at you. Okay, I can't see the ats on my end, but I will just scroll through. Dude, Servus, you just need to attach the. How far above is it, dude? There's like 1,000 messages here. I've been scrolling. Could you just like put it right here? I'll give it like a minute, and hopefully it comes up. But could you just like type it down right here, or just like email me or something, because it's been the second time in a row that this has happened to where I completely missed your question. I'm starting to feel bad about it. Unless you're married, sleep in separate rooms. Well, yeah. I mean, I honestly, like, it's shocking to me. Like, cohabitation, dude, guys, if you're listening, there's 300 guys listening right now, which means you all should like the stream. But dude, if you are visiting your girlfriend, like let's say your long distance relationship, visiting a female friend, in any way in near proximity to them, never be alone. Like, don't be alone in the same house. You're sleeping in the freaking front yard and she's sleeping in the basement. That's too close if you're alone. Okay. Don't do it. Do not be alone with them. Do not be, especially sleeping in the same bedroom, sleeping in the same house alone. I mean, come on, guys. We know how it goes. You are not as holy as you think. You are not as holy as you think. You're not as sanctified as you think. You're not as strong as you think. If holy David, beloved of God, fell to Bathsheba, you will fall, okay? If Solomon, the great oracle of wisdom, fell, you will fall, okay? The only thing to do is to imitate holy Joseph and run. Run, even if she grabs your cloak and you're running outside your house naked, run. Stay away from her, okay? Because you guys don't realize how dangerous this is. I see these people playing around with the casuistic subtleties of these questions when it comes to this sort of closeness with women, in their proximity, and like, oh, if it's hand, I must hold my girlfriend's hand. I must do it. It's an expression of my love to her. It's like, okay, one, you sound really gay, and two, like, come on, dude. You are a man with concupiscence. The demons of concupiscence will encapsulate your heart. You're with a woman right now. Don't be stupid, okay? You can go to lunch, go to dinner, go to breakfast, hang out at the coffee shop, hang out downstairs and watch TV at your parents' house. Like, there's a bajillion things you go to mass. There's a lot of things you could do. Just don't be alone. I mean, how hard is that? Don't touch her. Don't be alone with her. 2 things. You have 2 rules. Don't touch her. Don't be alone with her. And I guarantee you'll be perfectly fine, okay? I mean, mostly perfectly fine, okay? Those are 2 very simple rules. Yeah, but don't live together. That's also really gay. If you're living together, I'm very disappointed in you. Yeah, stay away from e-girls too. Somebody wants me to control F. Oh, sorry. How should those under 18 whose parents don't let them get jobs give alms as well? What's the gist? Well, I mean, if you're under 18, then it's not something which is going to be required of you by precept. I mean, this is assuming, like, we're not going to, for example, require that poor people give alms to like themselves or something. So no, it's not something which is going to be binding for you. Can somebody ask Wagner about Eckhart? Dude, ask about, was Bathsheba bad though? Yes. Yes, she was bad. Okay. Yes, she was bad. Bathsheba, dude. Okay. This right here. You're honestly, the simpery and nonsense of people who try to say that Bathsheba was good is just disgusting to me. Bathsheba, what she did is she was on the rooftop right next to the king's house in view of the king. Like, oh, the king lives right there. Like, yeah, you didn't know about that. Okay. And then she goes on the roof, strips down naked, and starts bathing. Okay. Yeah. That was incidental as a married woman. No, Bathsheba was not innocent. I just feel bad for her husband. I mean, Bathsheba should have been the one who got, executed. She should have been sent to the front lines. Why have you, as Holy Moses said, why have you let the women live? Is it okay to work a weekend shift? Yes. Oh, but surely holding hands will not be sinful in a lot of cases. This is the casuistic nonsense I'm talking about. Don't touch her. Okay? How hard is that? How hard is it just not to touch her? Okay? Like, this is like, oh, but like technically, I can just like hold her hand, and it'll be fine. Just don't like, how hard is it? Okay? This is just good, solid. I'm giving you good, solid advice. Giving you good, solid advice, and you're saying, oh, no, but I just want to touch her. Why? Why? Just don't touch her. It's not that hard. It's not too difficult. Just don't do it. It's just, okay. Think, just excise from your mind right now, can I do it or not? And enter into your mind, is it smart or not? Am I acting like an idiot, or am I not acting like an idiot? Like, that's the question you should answer. Yeah, touching a woman who you are proximately preparing to marry, and obviously you're physically attracted to, touching her, it just doesn't, it's just, we're in an over sexualized world, that it's just not a good idea. You just shouldn't do it. Okay. You just don't do it. Like, how much clearer does it get? Just don't do it. Like, it's just a smart idea not to do it. Like, I'm just giving you a smart idea, and you're like, oh, but technically I couldn't do it. No, just follow the smart idea. How hard is it just to be smart? Like, it's, if I told you, don't take don't go to the ATM, take all the money out of your bank account and throw it in a furnace. I said, don't do that. And you're like, but I could do it. Surely it's not sinful for me to do it. No, you'd be an idiot. It's a dumb thing to do. Okay. Touching a woman who you're physically attracted to and intending to marry and one day procreate with, when you're not allowed to, do that thing, it's just not a smart idea. Okay. That's just it. If you want to say it's a smart idea, you're just wrong. Okay. You're just wrong. And how do I know that? Because the Bible and the tradition say it's just not a good idea. Okay. That's just how I know. How hard is it? Do I need to give you like a scholastic syllogism for, don't touch women? No. Everybody just knows it's a bad idea. Oh, yeah. Go to the Since 33 AD stream, DoorDash Thomas stream on responding to Truglia. I don't know what it's responding on, but it's probably going to be an awesome stream. Living together is cringe. That I meant. No, it's not cringe. Cohabitation is sin. It will send you to hell. Okay, this is not merely like touching the hand, which can be excused for, there's just reasons to excuse touching the hand. No, living together alone with your girlfriend will send you to hell. You're going straight to hell. You leave your apartment with your girlfriend, on the road, you get hit by a car. The next second, you're feeling hellfire forever. Okay? Forever. Never ending. It's better to live in your car, let her have the apartment, live in your car until you get married. Do not live with your girlfriend. That is the stupidest idea in the entire world. Do not live with her. Okay? Do not do it. Like, I am begging and pleading. If any of you are living with your girlfriend, please come to here so I can slap you across the face, okay? Because this is the dumbest idea ever, ever, ever. Like, you might as well just go skinny dipping with her at that point. Actually, that would be much that would be like that would be 1/10 as dangerous, as living alone with a woman. 1/10 is dangerous. I mean, you might as well just, go to like Vegas or something and like go to a brothel at that point. Actually, you're treating your girlfriend worse than you're treating a prostitute at a brothel, because at least the woman there is doing it for money. But this is supposedly the future wife who you hold so dear in your heart, and she's not even doing it for money. She's merely doing it for the satisfaction of an emotional bond with another man. That's for concupiscence, mere concupiscence, not even money. She's not even getting paid for it. Anyways, do not live with anyone out there. Do not live with your girlfriend. Is it okay to call women bad? I feel like it's wrong to call people that. No. None are good but God alone. Bro, she was in the intimacy of her own house on her roof in front of where yeah, you're a simp. Yeah, I'm banning you. Yeah, Bathsheba defending will get you banned. Okay? You're getting banned. I thought he meant bad as in attractive. Can I put a ring on her? Yeah, you can get married. Would you run for local politics in North Dakota? No, I have no interest in office. Yeah, dude. Yes, you can hold hands with your homie, but do not do it with your girlfriend. That is gay. If you hold your girlfriend's hand, that is gay. Holding your friend's hand, that is cool. Okay? You're understanding that finally. Gosh, how many times do I have to explain it to you guys? What do you have to back with your extremity? Okay. What do you have to back the idea that if you jump in a blender, pour lemon juice and salt all over yourself, and then turn on the blender, that you're going to die? Okay. Actually, what scientific resources do you have to back up your study right here? Dumb question. What should a good Catholic do if they can't afford a wedding? Also, pray to Saint Mary of Egypt. Um, weddings weddings don't have to be expensive. That's the easy answer. You just get married. Don't go to a wedding when they are shacking up. So true. So this is real. She can't be veiled and wearing white, the symbols of virginity, if they're doing despicable things before the wedding. It's awful. It's like the whole thing's a farce. The whole thing's a farce. They're receiving the sacraments in a state of habitual mortal sin. It's the entire thing's a sacrilege. In what ways did the expression "full of grace" support the belief in Mary's sinlessness according to the original Greek meaning and context? Well, our Lord was full of grace and truth. I mean, when it comes to grace, the concept of grace is a gift which is given to us, which elevates us, and which is something which is remits sin, takes away sin, opposes sin. So if somebody's full of grace, that necessarily implies that they are empty of sin. The contrary, like if a cup is full of water, there's no air in it. But yeah, But I mean, if you're asking me about Greek exegesis, sorry, bud. That's just, those days are behind me. How the heck are you supposed to find out if your wife to be as faithful or not without dating her? I never said don't date your wife. Okay, I never said that. Never said don't date your wife. But I don't understand what dating her has to do with finding out whether she is faithful or not. Okay. Is sleeping in the same bed with your bros less gay than sleeping with your girlfriend? Of course. Of course. You never like been on a trip or something, or, you're, you never been on a trip or something. There's only one bed and you're just like, oh crap, where'd my light go? Right. You never been on a trip or something. There's only one bed. And you just have to be on opposite sides of the bed and say, like, if you go anywhere near touching me, like, I'm executing you in the middle of the night. You never had that happen before? Come on, that's not gay. That's just that's just happens sometimes. I can't believe you guys are so shocked by, oh, sleeping in bed with your bro is less gay than sleeping in a bed with your girlfriend. Like, yeah, dude, you should rather die than sleep in a bed with your girlfriend, but your friend, like, that's just a normal occurrence. If you use a dating app, you're a gooner. This is also true. I'm going to leave soon. Wait, is that you? Colin, is that really you? Because if it is, then we have definitely shared a bed before. but I mean, he's like my friend from like elementary school. So, I mean, why are you even on this side of YouTube? I mean, if it is you, that would be crazy. But I think you might be messing with me. You came in at the perfect time when I'm just trolling people. Are there any church fathers or scholastic writers who explicitly connect being full of grace with the absence or opposition to sin? Also, I'm a big fan. I mean, I just don't know off the top of my head. I don't know all of the fathers and scholastics' opinions on Luke 1, but I mean, I've seen it mentioned before, and those are usually the authors that I read. I'm sorry that I can't give you a more precise answer, but I mean, the best place to go, just go to Aquinas.cc. Just type in the Latin text in the search bar on the left. You can see where St. Thomas mentions it all. And then you can go to like various different catena, like patristic catene, which collect all of like the church father commentaries on a certain verse. But no way that's actually him. Tuned in for wait, why are you tuning? How long have you been tuning in, man? It's been forever. It's been a while. But how long have you been tuning in? That's my question. Did you get the part on the JQ in the beginning? That was fun. But no, I'm just crashing out right now, just having fun before I log off. Yeah, so I actually do have a fish in the tank. You can it's somewhere around here. Somewhere around there. Yeah, I mean, I've known Colin since I was like, gosh, like first grade, second grade. Yeah, we go way back. Oh, yep. There's a fish. There's a fish. But yeah, I do have a fish there. Okay. Well, anyways, I'm gonna log off. This has been fun. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I hope that you all have a fantastic rest of your day. And as always, God bless.